Hello everybody and welcome to the second instalment of Book Club. And remember, we are reading There's a Werewolf in My Tent. So where did we get to? Hurricane Zach. Even though we were trapped in our tent by Hurricane Zach, I was still having a really good time because I thought it was actually very exciting being in a tent in the middle of a storm, and I kept getting the giggles. We zipped Maisie up in one of her sleeping bags and put the hood bit up so she was nice and cosy, because that's really all you can do when Maisie faints because of fear. Jodie said we should make a survival plan because of the storm, but Zach said we should tell ghost stories instead because it was a bit dark because of the rain. And also because we had loads of snacks and all of Maisie's torches so we could make our faces all look really scary. But Jodie said that she wasn't really in the mood for ghost stories, which was mega weird because Jodie is usually always in the mood for ghost stories. So that's when Zach said that he knew a really good true story that wasn't a ghost story, and that it was a perfect time to tell it because Maisie was still having a little fainting nap, so she wouldn't hear it and get scared and faint again. So I got into my sleeping bag, even though it was still the afternoon, and I opened a sherbet dip. Zach shone a torch under his chin and tried to make himself look all scary. Have you ever tried that? If you hold it here, okay, makes you look like you've got a scary face. But me and Jodie burst out laughing because he was shining up his nose and lighting up all his nose hairs. So Zach moved the torch a bit, and then he said, once upon a time there was a very tall lady called Miss Troon, and she had a long nose and scratchy claws. There's a picture of Zach holding the torch. I looked at Jodie and she rolled her eyes at me because we both knew Zach was just making up his true story as he went along, and that Miss Troon was obviously Miss Moon. Then Zach said Miss Troon was a rain sorcerer who could summon the rain whenever she wanted, but one day she summoned the rain a bit too much and Hurricane Zach arrived. But Zach didn't get to finish his sentence because that's when the whole tent started shaking. At first we thought it was a storm making the tent shake, but then we looked at Maisie and saw that she was awake, and it was her that was doing all the shaking. I thought Maisie was shaking because she had heard Zach's not a ghost story, but then she pointed at the tent door, and that's when I screamed because there was a floating face. I got such a fright that I panicked and threw my sherbet dip at the floating face, and that made the face look even scarier because the sherbet dip exploded all over the floating face and made it really look like a ghost face. And that's when Zach started screaming too, and Maisie fainted again. But then the ghost face started coughing, and Jodie pushed it out of the tent and zipped the tent back up. Jodie said that it had just been Gary Petrie, and that we should all probably use her mini padlock to lock our tent so he didn't steal all of our snacks. And then another face appeared. But it was only Miss Jones telling us to come for dinner. Miss Moon was determined to do the barbecue, and she made us all stand in the rain for ages while she tried to light it before Miss Jones said, "That's it, we're going to a restaurant for dinner." But when we got to the restaurant, the waitress said that there were no burgers or sausages or steaks left, and that there was only the vegetarian option left. None of us were bothered because the vegetarian option was pizza. But Miss Moon made a big fuss about there not being any meat left, and that she wouldn't have any pizza, and she just sat there looking angry and saying that everyone should have left her to one more try of the barbecue to see if she could get it working, because then we could all have had sausages and burgers. Miss Jones didn't say anything. She just gave Miss Moon a look. It was like the look that Miss Jones gave me once when she asked me to carefully hold her handbag when I wasn't going into the swimming pool because of my toenail issue, and I accidentally dropped it in the pool. Maisie whispered, "Miss Moon is a bit of a moan, isn't she?" And we all agreed because she definitely was, and the whole freaking out because she couldn't have any meat thing was a bit ridiculous. We said that Zach could come into our tent before bed so that we could all tell stories and eat snacks, and also because we needed his help to get Maisie's mosquito net up. It took ages to get Maisie inside all of her sleeping bags because one of them had all these complicated bits that Maisie's legs and arms had to go into, and once she was all zipped up, it sort of looked like a space suit. Maisie said that she was too sleepy and too terrified to tell ghost stories, so we just put her eye mask on her and made sure she had her wax earplugs in. There's Maisie, all cosy. Me and Jodie and Zach sat in the living room bit with the torches. Jodie was being very quiet, which was a bit weird because one time when I had been at her house, I actually had to put my hand up because she wouldn't stop talking when I wanted to say something. Zach said that he was going to go back to his own tent because he was tired and he was going to check if Miss Moon was still trying to get the barbecue to work first because he was still a bit hungry for a barbecue. It was totally dark outside, so me and Jodie said that we would just stay in the tent and that when Zach got into his tent, he should use his torch to flash to us the signal of 3 flashing flashes. So we waited, but Zach didn't do any flashes, so we waited more. But then Jodie said that was almost 10 minutes and that something must have gone wrong and that Zach had probably wandered off into the wilderness. I said that we needed to go out and find Zach right away because I didn't like the idea of him being lost in the scary woods all by himself. But then Jodie said that one of us had to stay with Maisie because if she woke up on her own, she would freak out. I knew Jodie was right, but I was too scared to go out on my own, so I didn't say anything and Jodie didn't say anything, so we just sat there and waited for Zach to do the flashes. Howling in the night. When I woke up, I had no idea where I was and everything was pitch black. But then I heard Maisie snoring and remembered that I was in a tent and that we were camping. Then I remembered that we weren't supposed to be sleeping because we were supposed to be waiting for Zach to do the flashes. I was just about to wake Jodie up to tell her that we had fallen asleep when I remembered what had woken me. Howling. I'd heard howling. I froze. I was too scared to move, so I just lay there and listened. But I couldn't hear anything except Maisie snoring. I whispered to Jodie, but she didn't answer. I felt around with my hands to see if she was lying next to me, but there was no one there. And that's when I started to panic because Jodie must have gone out searching for Zach herself, and now they were both lost in the woods. I had to do something, even if there was a scary howling beast lurking outside. So that's when I put my torch on and looked around. Jodie definitely wasn't there. I was just about to wake up Maisie and tell her we had a big problem when I noticed a lump in the other bedroom bit. I shone my torch on the lump and my heart almost fell out of my body because the lump wasn't Jodie. The lump was huge and dark and fuzzy, and that's when I realised the howling and where it had come from. There was a wild beast in our tent. Next chapter. There's a wild beast in our tent. I was just about to scream when Jodie's survival training kicked in, and I realised that if I did, I'd probably get eaten by the wild beast, so I didn't. Jodie said once that when something bad happens, people can either fight or flight, which means that they run away so fast that it looks like they're flying. I counted to 5 really slowly in my head and I made a flight plan. I was going to grab Maisie and run. But then I realised that I wouldn't be able to get past Maisie's mosquito net and get her out of her spacesuit sleeping bag without making a lot of noise and waking up the beast. So I made a flight plan instead. I made a fight plan instead. My mistake. I was going to trap the beast and then get Maisie out safely. I crawled really slowly and really quietly across the tent towards Jodie's backpack. I could feel my heart beating in my throat as I searched inside for the mini padlock. I kept my eyes on the beast at all times, which made it hard to search the rucksack. But Jodie had said to them to maintain eye contact at all times when faced with a wild animal. I almost cried out with happiness when I felt the cold metal of the mini suitcase padlock with my fingers, and then Maisie did a louder snorty thing, and the beast moved a bit, so that when I leapt up across the tent and zipped up the door to the beast's bedroom, and put a little padlock through the zips and snapped it shut, I was worried he had heard. Then I leapt into the other bedroom bit and started pulling Maisie out of the tent by her feet, because that was going to be quicker than trying to get out of her spacesuit sleeping bag. But then Maisie started screaming because she had no idea what was going on, and she still had on her eye mask and her earplugs. That's when the beast woke up and started trying to get out of the bedroom bit. So I got Maisie out of the tent and into the long grass before unzipping her and shouting for Miss Jones at the top of my voice. The next morning, Miss Jones and Miss Moon looked really tired and annoyed. I knew that it was because we had woken up the whole camp in the middle of the night. Miss Jones had not been pleased about the screaming coming from Maisie, or the fact that Zack was almost crying because he had been zipped up in the bedroom bit of the tent. She also wasn't pleased that Jodie and Zack had switched tents without permission, and neither was I, because if Jodie had just woken me up and told me that Zack had come to our tent to tell us that his torch had run out of battery so he couldn't do the flashing, and that he was too scared to sleep in the survival tent by himself, and that Jodie had switched tents with him because she was not scared, then I definitely wouldn't have thought that Zack with his big black hairy blanket was a wild beast. And I wouldn't have given myself and Maisie and Miss Jones such a fright. Jodie thought the whole thing was hilarious. But I didn't, even though the hairy lump had just turned out to be Zack. It still didn't explain the howling that I had heard that had woken me up in the first place. Jodie said I'd probably just dreamt it, and that really annoyed me because, like I said, I think I know the difference between hearing something in real life and dreaming it. But then Jodie said that she hadn't heard a thing, and neither had Maisie, but I knew that Maisie had been wearing earplugs made from real beeswax, so she couldn't have heard it even if the beast had howled right in her ear. Then Jodie asked Zack, and he said that he hadn't heard any howling in the night, but that he had heard a snuffling sound outside the tent, but that he just thought it'd been a dog. I stared at Zack, because he had obviously forgotten that we were on a campsite and that there were only people there, and that we hadn't brought a dog with us. That's when Jodie said that maybe there were people in the caravan bit who had had a dog. And I knew that made sense, but I still had a weird feeling about the howling. Plus, Jodie had been acting a bit weird since we got on the bus, so I knew that she wasn't really paying attention to the evidence properly. Then, when we were all having our cereal together, Maisie said, "Miss Jones, are there wolves in these woods?" Miss Moon stood up really slowly and got a weird look on her face. "Are you asking about wolves?" We all looked up at Miss Moon, which took a few seconds because of how tall Miss Moon is, especially when you're sitting down. Maisie's spoon started hitting on the side of her cereal bowl, and we all knew it was because she was shaking because she was scared of Miss Moon and how tall she was. There's Miss Moon. Isn't she tall? So then I put my hand on Maisie's hand to stop the shaking. I said, "Maisie was just asking if you get wolves here because I heard something last night." Miss Jones said that there were no wolves here and that it was probably just the wind that I had heard the night before. Zack asked Miss Jones if she was sure because he thought that this would be the perfect place for wolves because of how thick the forest was, and that wolves would probably love roaming and hiding here. Then Miss Moon said, "Miss Jones is quite right that there are no wolves here, but there used to be. The last wolf in Scotland was seen in these actual woods, and someone wants to release wolves back into the Scottish countryside. Isn't that a great idea? I think wolves are wonderful creatures." And she smiled a really weird smile. I was just about to say that it wasn't a good idea at all, and that it was terrifying instead, when I noticed that Maisie was going a bit swirly in the eyes, so I changed the subject and asked what we were doing after breakfast. It's Maisie's swirly eyes. That's when Miss Moon got really excited and she told us about the scavenger hunt. Miss Moon said that she'd woken up at 5 a.m. and laid the scavenger hunt around the whole campsite, and that the team had completed a scavenger hunt, and that the team that completed the scavenger hunt first would win a prize. Miss Jones said that we had to get into teams of 4 and decide a leader, and before we could even say one word, Jodie shouted, "Me! I'm the leader!" The scavenger hunt. Jodie dragged us into the woods to look for the first items on the scavenger hunt list because she loves games and competitions like that. I wasn't sure if Maisie was going to be okay because she kept saying that this was the very first time that she'd ever been in the wilderness, and also because she wouldn't open her eyes, so she kept bumping into everything. It was so easy to find the first couple of things on the scavenger hunt list because the first item was a leaf and the second item was an acorn. And then Maisie said, "What are those?" And I looked up and I saw that Maisie was pointing to a tree covered in scratches. Me and Zach went over to investigate. And that's when we saw how deep the scratches were. I looked at Zach and he looked at me, and I just knew that he was thinking the same as me, and that the thing he was thinking was, "Wild beast." But then Jodie shouted that we had to pay attention to the scavenger hunt because Jodie was very competitive. And one time when she didn't win the class Christmas quiz, her mum had to come and collect her because she got so mad she broke every single rubber in the rubber tray, and Maisie said that she was so lucky she didn't get expelled. So anyway, Jodie told us to stop staring at the trees and to help her find a blueberry ASAP. But when we were looking at the bush bit for a blueberry, Maisie screamed and pointed to something, and I thought it was going to be more tree scratches. But it wasn't. It was much worse because it was a giant poo. We all stared at the giant poo because it's probably the biggest poo in the world. And even though it was completely disgusting, we all couldn't stop looking at it, and it was probably because we were all in shock. Zach said that something really big must have made it. And then he looked at me and gulped, and I knew that was because he was remembering the tree scratches and the howling. But then Jodie picked up a broken branch covered with leaves and threw it over the giant poo so that we couldn't see it anymore, and told us to focus, and also that it was probably just a really big dog that had done it, or maybe even a horse. So we all went to a different bit of the woods to look for a blueberry because no one wanted to look for blueberries in the poo bit. After the blueberry, the scavenger hunt got harder because you had to solve a riddle, and the riddle said, "You'll find me standing tall, ready to take your call." I had no idea what the riddle meant, but Maisie is very good at riddles, and she said that it was most definitely a phone box. Jodie almost exploded with excitement when Maisie said that, and then she shouted, "There's a phone box on camp!" And then she grabbed the map from my hand and pointed down towards the river. I was surprised that Jodie was so excited about the phone box because she definitely hadn't been screaming about the leaf or the acorn. Then Jodie said, "You know what, people? We might actually win this thing!" And then she grabbed our hands and we all ran towards the phone box. I'm going to pause there for a moment because I'm wondering if our next activity could be linked to a scavenger hunt. For those of you that know what one is, then you could have a go at this. But if you don't, a scavenger hunt is a list that you can create, and you might ask someone to create it for you, or you might create it for a brother or sister in your household, and it might be items that you can find around your garden, or maybe in your house, or maybe in your house and in your garden. So you might have on there things like a toothbrush or a hairbrush, a sock, a baseball hat, a pillow. Okay, you might create a list of things that you know that you can find in your house, and then you have one list, and your brother, your sister, your grown-up has the same list, and you have to try and compete against each other. Who can go and find all of those items in the quickest time? Okay, have a go. Maybe you could pop some pictures onto our Facebook page of you having a go at creating your own scavenger hunt. I'd love to hear how you get on. Right, next chapter. The River Garry. When we got to the phone box, Jodie went inside for ages and looked like she was and it looked like she was actually trying to use the phone. So I banged on the glass to see if she'd found any clues, but she shook her head and to say that she hadn't, but she stayed in there anyway. Then we heard someone shouting, and we saw Gary Petrie sitting on a sign at the entrance of the forest and shouting something at the rest of the group. Jodie started walking towards Gary Petrie, so I said, "Where are you going?" And Jodie said that she thought someone had taken the phone box clue so no one else could win, and that is exactly what Gary Petrie is like. So we all marched over to where Gary's group was. When we got there, we saw that the sign that Gary was sitting on said, "This way to the River Gary." He was doing loads of poses on the sign and getting someone in his group to take his picture of him showing off. Then he spotted us and said, "Thou cannot pass into my forest." I said, "It's not your forest." But Gary Petrie just pointed to the sign and said, "Read it and weep." I was just about to tell Gary that he was more annoying than everything when Jodie said, "Actually, it's the river that's called Gary, not the forest." Gary looked at the sign for a bit and then said, "Well, thou cannot go into my river then." And Jodie said, "That's fine by us, because your horrible river will obviously be pure freezing." But Gary said that it wasn't, and that it was probably as warm as a jacuzzi, and that Miss Moon would probably let him go in for a swim in his own river later. That's when Jodie burst out laughing and said that Gary obviously had no idea about bodies of water. Then Jodie went on for ages about average temperatures of rivers in Scotland and rapids and danger, and Gary Petrie looked so confused that he didn't say anything back. So that's when we asked about the phone box clue, and Gary Petrie smiled a bit and said that he had no idea what we were talking about, which meant that he definitely did know. So Jodie stepped forward and gave him one of her looks, and Gary gulped because he was a little bit scared of Jodie. And then he said, "The clue just said to look here at this sign." So Jodie stepped even closer to Gary Petrie and said, "Okay, so show us what you found." Gary Petrie got a weird look on his face and said, well... We all realised that they hadn't actually found the next item yet, and all of a sudden Jodie dropped to the ground and crawled through Gary Petrie's legs and grabbed something from under the sign, and I saw that it was covered. And I saw that it was a red glove. Maisie yelled, "The final scavenger hunt item!" And Jodie ran. Gary Petrie ran, and his group ran, all of them chasing Jodie because they wanted the red glove so they could win the scavenger hunt. But we knew that there was no way they were going to catch Jodie, because last year she actually won every single prize at Sports Day. There she is. That's when we got back to camp. And when we did, Miss Moon said that we won the scavenger hunt, and Gary Petrie was so annoyed that he said he was going to his tent and that no one should disturb him ever. So we said that we wouldn't let him know when lunch was ready, and that's when he said that he changed his mind and that it was fine to disturb him if it was about food or games or anything good. Then Miss Moon said that it was time to play Hot Chocolate River, and Gary shouted, "The River Gary!" Miss Moon said that 2 long ropes marked either side of Hot Chocolate River, and that we had to get from one side to the other using only marshmallows. Miss Jones handed everyone a paper plate and said that we had to pretend they were marshmallows. She told us to use the paper plates to pass safely from one side of the Hot Chocolate River to the other. And she said that we had to keep a foot on the paper plates at all times, or they would float away. I just knew that we were going to lose the game, because we were in a group with Gary Petrie and one of his annoying friends who just secretly stuffed about 20 cheese puffs into his mouth. As soon as Miss Jones shouted, "Go!" all of the group started using their paper plates to cross. That's when Cheese Puff Jeff shouted, "Come on!" right in my ear, and I screamed because he spat cheese dust all over me. And Maisie toppled off her paper plate and landed in the river. And even though it was only a pretend river, Maisie screamed so loud that it echoed through the forest and everyone had to cover their ears. Then Gary Petrie said, "I'll save her. I have the power of River Gary running through me." So Gary pretended to swim through the grass, and he scooped Maisie up and helped her back onto a paper plate. That's when Miss Moon came rushing over and said, "Excellent teamwork! Well done, everyone, especially Gary." Gary Petrie started taking loads of bows and then licking his fingers and pointing to the sky and shouting, "The power of River Gary!" And then he looked at Maisie and winked, and Maisie started giggling. Miss Moon said that we could have some free time, and then she got a really excited look on her face and told us that there would definitely be a barbecue later, and we all knew that she was excited because she was a bit obsessed with meat. And then all of a sudden Zach ran over to us and he said we had to get into the tent ASAP, and then he covered Maisie's ears with his hands and said, "Hurry, it's a level 11 emergency." I'm going to pause again. I wonder if it might be rather good fun to have a go at playing Hot Chocolate River. So I wonder if you maybe don't have 2 ropes at home, but maybe you have 2 skipping ropes or 2 long jumpers, or something that you can use, maybe a line of cushions that you can use to pop on the floor in your house, on the carpet, or if you're outside, ask your grown-ups about something sensible you could use to mark the river outside so it doesn't get wet or dirty. And can you use a paper plate, a sheet of newspaper, some cardboard that might be being thrown out to be recycled? Can you, on your own or with your grown-ups or with your siblings, can you cross the Hot Chocolate River without falling in? Now maybe you could make it quite narrow to start with, which would be quite easy, but could you make it wider and make it a bit more challenging? Can you make the marshmallows, whatever you're using your marshmallows to be, whatever you're pretending they are, can you put those further apart so maybe you have to really stretch, or maybe even jump across Hot Chocolate River to get to the side? Have a go. Again, I'd love to see your photographs. Right, next chapter. A level 11 emergency. Zach uncovered Maisie's ears because she'd obviously heard him anyway, because her eyes had gone all swirly, and then she'd sort of slumped against Zach and slid to the ground. And we all knew that Maisie had fainted because of a level 11 emergency. And that's our code for an emergency that is even more serious than the usual most serious level 10 emergency. Miss Moon came racing over when she saw that Maisie had fainted, shouting, "Camper down! Camper down!" And Zach went really weird in the face, but we didn't know why. Maisie opened her eyes and said that she was okay and that she just needed some fresh air. So we all used our hands to fan air onto Maisie's face and hoped that Miss Moon would just go away so Zach could finish telling us what on earth was going on. But Miss Moon was already on the ground next to Maisie, checking her vital signs and shining a torch in her eyes. And then she started asking Maisie how many fingers she was holding up and who the Prime Minister was. I didn't really think that was a good time to be giving Maisie a quiz since she just fainted, but Maisie managed to get all the answers right, and that made Miss Moon happy. Then Miss Moon took off her jacket and put it over Maisie and told her to stay completely still until she could locate some fresh water, and then she ran off. So we all asked Maisie if she was okay, and Maisie nodded that she was, even though she was still lying on the floor in the recovery position with Miss Moon's jacket over her and bits of mud and twigs in her hair. But then Maisie took a deep breath and said, "I'm fine, really." And I smiled at her because she was being really brave, and also because I wanted her to look at me and not at the beetle that was right beside her head. Then Zach said, "Come on, we have to get out of here." So we picked up Maisie and we ran. When we got to the tent, Zach looked a bit weird. His hair was even messier than usual, and he was muttering to himself as he rushed around, packing a backpack, until Jodie grabbed him by the shoulders and said, "What?" But Zach said that he couldn't tell us here, and that the walls have ears. And even though that made no sense, it really freaked Maisie out, and she jumped inside one of her sleeping bags and said that she wouldn't come out because she didn't want to see the creepy wall ears. Zach wouldn't stop packing the backpack and muttered things like "should have known" and "it's only a matter of time," and Maisie was shaking so badly I thought the whole tent might fall over. But then Jodie put her fingers in her mouth and she did a loud whistle and everybody froze, even Maisie. Then Jodie said, "Enough! We have trained for this, people. If it really is a level 11 emergency, we know what to do, okay?" But no one said anything. So Jodie said, "Okay." So we all nodded and clear, because we knew that from our levels of emergency training that Jodie had made us do in her house after the time Zach got stuck in the bathroom for almost an hour because of the broken door handle, that we should all shout clear in a situation like this. Then Jodie said, "Bag," and Zach said, "Check," and then Jodie said, "Izzy, pad," and I grabbed a notepad and a pen and said, "Check," and then Jodie said, "Maisie, jump," and Maisie leapt out of her sleeping bag and onto Jodie's back, and Jodie yelled, "Go, go, go, go!" Right, I'm going to leave it there. Our next chapter is the meat thing. I hope you've enjoyed our second instalment. I certainly have. And have a go at those activities I suggested. See how you get on, and keep us updated via the Facebook page. Take care. See you soon. Bye.